Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to see so many smiling people here today. We're happy to be here on Veterans Day, of course. The purpose of today is to honor all of the veterans, and we owe them a lot. But before we talk about the current veterans, I think it's very important that we honor those who have gone before us and all the honor they gave. World War I, World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, and the last full measure of devotion they gave. Hundreds of thousands of American military men and American military women gave their last full motion, emotion, devotion. And we want to honor them. And I'm going to ask Karen Griffin to play taps. So everybody who can stand up, will you please stand up? And then veterans remain standing afterwards. Karen? Thank you, Karen. Let's remain standing for 1 second. Of course, we want to honor those who've gone before us and who fought the fascist dictators like Hitler and Mussolini and the Emperor of Japan, and were in their grace and their goodness. Anyway, let's give a for all the veterans who are today. Okay, thank you. Everybody can remain seated. Now I'd like to turn to somebody you know, heard of, Irving Berlin. Irving Berlin was born in Russia in 1888. After he came to this country, he wrote over 800 songs. He wrote songs for Broadway stage. He wrote songs for the movies. You would recognize them. He wrote White Christmas, Easter Parade, Annie, Get Your Gun. So many wonderful songs. And he was great. And God Bless America. God Bless America was what Kate Smith sang at the end of her show during World War II, at the end of her show. She was fabulous. Okay, so all the group will stand and we'll have a little song from Irving Berlin for his show, This is the Army. So we're going to sing. Okay, on three. 1, 2, 3. This is the Army, Mr. Jones. No private rooms or telephones. You had your breakfast in bed before, but you won't have it here anymore. This is the Army, Mr. Green. We like the barracks nice and clean. You had a housemaid to clean your floors, but she won't help you out anymore. Do the buglers come and not in a band? This is the Army, Mr. Brown. You and your baby went to town. She had you made, but this is, and she won't be you anymore. All right. Okay. All right, well, now we move to, we're going to move to the individual stories of our veterans here. They'll tell us a little bit about their military experience. I'm going to start with Jack Florin.
Don, would you mind if I use the
You
microphone
can
here?
use the microphone up there, Jack.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jack Florin. I'm an ex-corporal in the U.S. Army, ER 17487-986. I have a lot more fluidity with that number than I certainly do with my Social Security number. As one of my 10 granddaughters told me recently, you know, Papa, you are the oldest person I know on the planet. I reluctantly accepted that analysis, realizing that in a couple of days I'll be 91 years old. So that's a long time. I was a freshman at the University of Wisconsin in 1952, the September of 1952. Obviously, the Korean War was at full steam at that stage. The Korean War, as most of you remember, went from 1950 through 1953. I went to Wisconsin, which was a land grant college. A land grant college, if you recall, became such under the Morrill Act of 1862. Congress passed the legislation. Abraham Lincoln signed it, and around the nation, a number of states were granted federal land for universities. Of the 14 Big Ten schools prior to 2024, 12 of those schools were land grant universities. The only exceptions were Northwestern and the University of Michigan. The other 12 were all land grant schools. A land grant school was awarded special federal acreage if they complied with three things under this congressional edict. One, you had to provide engineering classes at the university. Two, you had to provide agricultural classes at the university. And three, you had to provide military training. Remember, this is 1862 at the height of the Civil War. Wisconsin was one of those land grant schools. So as a freshman and a sophomore, you were required to take officer candidate training, or ROTC. That was then an optional selection as you entered your junior and senior year. Well, in 1953, I was a sophomore. The Korean War was going full blast, and we had the option of deciding whether or not we would be in the advanced ROTC as juniors and seniors, or we could drop out. If you dropped out, this was a national program, you were subjected to a pass-fail examination. The examination was such that if you passed, you could stay at the university and complete your studies and graduate. If you failed, you were immediately eligible for the U.S. draft. You were 1A and you could be drafted out of college immediately. Well, it was a tough decision for a lot of us. Fortunately, I did pass the exam and was able to stay in school and graduate in the class of 56. But a decision had to be made. Did I really want to go on to ROTC's advanced training? With the war going on, also I figured I could make more money on the outside if I stayed in, graduated, which actually happened. But following graduation in June of 56, I was drafted in February of 1957. So you can't outguess Uncle Sam. Drafted, was sent to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where a number of you probably entered basic training. After basic training, off to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas for advanced training. My advanced training, they decided, was going to be in medium range radio communications and long range radio communications. Well, that happened to be a real blessing because the war was still going on. I was in a unit of 88 individuals. 87 went to Korea in a rifle regiment. Jack was lucky. They kept me as an instructor at the communications school. So communications, off we went. One of the things that happened early on that was rather humorous, we didn't celebrate Memorial Day in those days. It was called Decoration Day. Decoration Day on Fort Chaffee, or from Fort Chaffee, which had about 35,000 troops at the time, roughly 3,000 marched in the Decoration Day parade in adjacent Fort Smith, Arkansas. This parade, as you might expect, was the last Monday of May. In Arkansas in May, the temperatures very likely would be close to 100 and the humidity at 100%. In those days, we were still wearing World War II OD heavy wool uniforms. The OD stood for olive drab. I was fortunate as an instructor to not have to march in this parade, but 3,000 of the troops marched in the 1958 Decoration Day parade. As they marched along, one after another passed out. The heat simply was overwhelming. As the troops fell, along with their M1 rifles, there was this joyous cheer and clap from the crowd. This kind of amazed me. I couldn't understand what was going on. I'm a history, particularly Civil War buff. And after the parade was over, it finally dawned on me that Decoration Day celebrated the deaths of Union troops. And here we were at the Mecca of Confederacy. So as one after another of these damn Yankees passed out, it was great for the crowd in attendance. So that was my first introduction to an off-post situation in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. In the summer of 1958, reluctantly, the U.S. Army allowed me a leave of 10 days to get married. So off I went back home to Wisconsin, and Gail and I were married in late June. 67 years later, that was one of the great decisions of my life. We've had a wonderful life together. Gail was a oncoming senior, and this was the summer of her senior year. So she came to Arkansas, where we rented a small apartment in Fort Smith, Arkansas, off post. We endured the June heat, or the July heat, I should say, because we were married in late June, for a number of days. Finally, one afternoon, we decided we were going to leave this tiny apartment and its heat and go out to the porch and play gin rummy. We were overcome with the heat outside. And in those days, in rural Arkansas, nothing was air conditioned. That included theaters, restaurants, motels, hotels, most homes. Well, obviously we had no air conditioning, but on the fort, there was a theater complex where we were allowed to purchase tickets for 50 cents each. We endured our gin rummy for a while, and finally I said, Gail, I can't handle it. Let's go to the fort and go to a movie. So for $1, we were going to the movie. This was on the 31st of July. Our payday was August 1st. So I had 50 cents in my pocket. Gail had a quarter in her purse. We were able to scrounge up a dime under a cushion on the sofa, and someplace in the bedroom, we came up with another nickel. However, that added up to 90 cents. We were 10 cents shy of going to the movie and cooling off. That to me was abject poverty. Well, Gail finally, at the end of that summer, off she went back to Madison, Wisconsin to finish her senior year, probably very happy to leave this in this environment. However, before she left, we got to know three other couples quite well at the port. So our entertainment on Saturday night for the four couples was the local laundromat. The laundromat had a TV set, which certainly none of us had. It was not air conditioned, but it did have a Pepsi machine where you could buy Pepsi in a bottle for 10 cents. So we had our Pepsi, our packed dinners, and TV and great conversation. This was our entertainment for the week. Finally, one last story, and this one is long after Gail's gone back to school. It had to be late in 1958. My commanding officer said, "Corporal Florin, you will be asked to present a 1.5-hour lecture to all the officers on this post." Now, I'm a corporal, an enlisted man, and I'm going to talk to hopefully a very enthusiastic officer group, not likely. The fort had some 4,000 officers, and the auditorium that day was filled with about 2,500 officers. Needless to say, I was anxious to get out of this assignment. I didn't prevail. Uncle Sam did. You will teach this class on medium and long-range communications in a combat situation to all the officers on this post. I had a good friend, another one of the instructors on in the command, who was an ex-offensive tackle for the University of Nebraska, a wonderful Irishman with a typical Irish sense of humor. His name was Tom McGuire. So I said, "Mac, I need a couple of jokes from you. One, to start this whole thing off, and two, something to end the presentation with." "No problem, Jack. Here too." So I practiced those two jokes along with the rest of the presentation. And as nervous as I was at the beginning, I started to get into the flow of things and felt fairly good by the end of the presentation. At the end of the presentation, the lights in this 2,500 seat auditorium went up, and there was "Tetch Hut." The commanding general's adjutant had announced the commanding general's appearance, and the general and his aides walked down the center aisle, and of course, all the officers rose, and I'm on the stage, and I'm a little in trepidation of what's going to happen. The general walked up on the stage, turned to me and said, "Gentlemen, I'd like to have you give Corporal Florin a standing ovation." That was a fine presentation. One of the things that I recall vividly at the beginning of this presentation, with the first joke, there was a titter at the most. Nobody laughed. However, at the end, with one of Mac's really off-color jokes, I got a tremendous amount of laughter out of that joke. Now, back to the general. He turned to me, and his adjutant dismissed the troops, the officers, and he turned to me and said, "Corporal, I meant what I said. That was a fine presentation. Now hear me out while I tell you something else. If I ever hear you tell another off-color joke on this post, you will be on KP for the rest of your time in the U.S. Army. You got that?" Yes, sir. So that day I learned a couple of things. One, a great deal of humility after the general was through with me. Secondly, I was not going for a career in comedy. But one of the things that I did learn, and it stuck with me fortunately throughout my career in the Army, was great discipline. Without the Army's discipline, I don't know what I would have handled as far as a career. They really taught me how to deal with the disciplinary situation personally and the people that work for me. So thanks for your patience and go Army.
Use this phone.
I think this is okay.
This one's perfect.
Yeah, that one right, sorry.
Take it right to your mouth.
Okay, it's working. I was in the Navy. This is how an 18-year-old wound up in the Navy. When I was getting ready to graduate from high school, I said to my dad, I'm talking into it. Okay. When I was ready to graduate from high school, I said to my dad, you know, I don't want to go to college right now. All I want to do is get a job, save my money, and buy a car. All you've got to do is sign. He looked at me. He said, nothing doing. I says, if you don't sign, I'm joining the Navy. He says, you won't do that. I graduated high school on a Thursday night. The following Tuesday, I was up in Great Lakes. I was there for 8 or 10 weeks. And after boot camp, I'm not going to go through boot camp. You don't need to hear about that. After I was through with boot camp, we get that big brown envelope, which has your records and it has your orders. My orders were to report to a ship in Long Beach, California. That guy up there. That ship, as you can see, it's CA-133. That means it was a heavy cruiser, meaning simply that the big guns, the diameter of the round thing at the end of the gun is 8 inches. A light cruiser is 6 inches. Those were used more during World War II. Anyway, I reported to the ship, saluted the officer of the deck, and he says, what's your name? I says, Siegel, sir. Where are you from? I says, Chicago. He looked at me and he said, you relation to Bugsy Siegel? I said, no, sir. He said, you sure of that? I said, no, sir. I was on that ship almost 2.5 years. What do you think they called me? Bugs. Anyway, he tells me so to take me downstairs to the quarters where I'd be. And the guy takes me down and he says, you got any questions? I says, yeah. What is this buzzing? How can you take this buzzing that you hear? He says, what buzzing? I said, don't you hear the buzzing? He said, no, I don't. He says, then he says, look around you. Do you see any portholes? I says, no. He says, we don't have any. We have to move the air around. And that's why we got that buzzing all the time. And I says, well, what am I going to be doing here? He says, well, you're going to be on the deck force. And I says, what does that entail? He says, well, the captain of the ship on this particular ship he felt that every sailor who came from boot camp had to learn some seamanship. And so the next day I learned about seamanship, which started with chipping and scraping of paint. And we did quite a bit of that. Then we swabbed the deck. And then we swept it other times. And then when that wasn't, we did bright work polishing. Then they put me on a rat detail, which was simply where we would take a piece of sheet metal that was round, and then it was in it was bent into a concave shape, and that was tied to the rope where we moored it when we moored the ship, so rats wouldn't go up the rope at night. So that was it. So I was working with the deck forest for about 6, 7 weeks, and then the bosun who had headed that division comes up to me and says, "I want to have a talk with you, Bugs." So I thought to myself, maybe I'm going to go to another place. And he says, oh, before he said anything, I thought about this. And ladies and gentlemen, it didn't get better. It got worse. He sent me down to mess cooking, where I had to work in the galley, cleaning up after the cooks, carrying out garbage, carrying out grease. Occasionally they'd have me help cook pancakes. And we would cook, there may be 4 or 5 of us, we'd cook 400 or 500 of them. And we'd serve them 2 hours after they were made. So how do you serve a cold pancake in the Navy? You heat up the syrup. And when you heat that syrup up, it's served warm. So anyway, so I did that. Now I'll tell you a sort of a cute story. Sometimes they used to they'd have me make up a drink like Kool-Aid, but we used a concentrated flavor like strawberry or lime or what have you. And it was a plastic bottle, and it squirted into a container. And it wasn't popular, but I made it. And one time I cleaned up the galley at the end. I saw them using this same concentrate and squirting it on the floor. So I said to the chief commissar, I said, I was using it to make the drink. And he said, "Stuff cuts the grease better than anything you've ever had." Anyway, so I was on the deck force, for another 4 or 5 weeks. And then I got one of the fellows who was a quartermaster had a talk with me, and he says, "We're going to have an opening in the division. You think you'd be interested?" I says, "I certainly would be interested." He says, "Well, you better speak to the officer who heads that up." And so I spoke with him, and he said he'd speak to the officer who headed up the deck force where I worked, and knock on wood, I became a quartermaster. In the Navy, a quartermaster helps steer the ship. They call that the helmsman. And so I did quite a bit of that. Then you also write the log. Everything that occurs that they want you to write about, you put in the log. Like once in a while, they'd have a court martial on the ship. So I'd have to write United States versus seaman such and such. The first time I wrote that, I actually got the shakes. I figured, the United States versus this poor guy. But anyway, but I would write different things like that. Now, I was similar to the gentleman next to me, in 56, 57, 58, I was in what you call a kiddie cruise. That meant that just before you're 21, you get discharged. So anyway, in the 50s, the Navy had an advertising slogan that said, "Join the Navy, see the world." Remember that? Well, anyway, I went on a couple of cruises. The first one that I went on, the ship was based in Long Beach. So we started our cruise south. We went down to San Diego. From San Diego, we went to Santa Barbara. From Santa Barbara up to San Francisco. San Francisco up to Portland, Oregon, and a couple of more cities in Oregon. Then we went up to Washington State and we stopped in Seattle. And from Seattle, we went up into Canada, into Vancouver, British Columbia. And then we went a little further north and then we had some maneuvers with the Canadian Navy. And then we came back down to Long Beach for a couple of months. Then we started the big cruise, which was to Westpac, which is short for Western Pacific. The first port that we hit going west was Hawaii. I made 2 cruises coming back and forth. That meant that I was in Hawaii 4 times. And just an aside, when I got engaged to my wife, and I said, if you're thinking of going to Hawaii for a honeymoon, you won't go with me. Anyway, from Hawaii, we went to Japan. And I'm going to go through some of the cities that we went to in Japan. The first city, of course, was Yokohama, which was, one of the main ports. And then the big port for the U.S. Navy at that time was Yokosuka or Yokosuka. And there they had sort of a cottage industry around the base of tailor shops where sailors could go and they could have their uniforms customized. And what I meant is a lot of them wanted to wear the top or the blouse of their uniform a little tighter. So what they would do is they tighten it up and put a zipper in the side. Then another thing they would do is on the cuffs, they would embroider like Mount Fuji, or they embroider dragons and things like. In the peacoat, you know what the peacoats are? In the peacoat, they would pull out your lining and they could put in a Mount Fuji in for the entire lining, or you could have dragons put in. I had all of that done. Yokosuka. Some of the other cities that we went to, let's see here. All right. We went to Kobe, Sasebo, Okinawa, and Nagoya. And I didn't do this in sequence because it's been 70 years since I did this. And then I went to South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, where else? And then we went back. Okay. And then I did another cruise, same thing. And when my enlistment was up to about 5 months, 4 months, 5 months, and one of the personnel men came over and said they want to see you in the office. So I was wondering what, I didn't do anything. What do I need to do? So anyway, I go there are 3 other guys go there with me. In the Navy, they joke around a lot. So the personnel man says to us, now this was 1958, and our president at the time was President Eisenhower. And the personnel man says, look, do you want to help out the president? He wants to save some money. And this is how he can save some money. He wondered if you'd mind if we cut your enlistment 3 months short. We didn't mind that at all. He says, however, you're going to be transferred. And we were transferred to the Oakland shipyard, which is next to San Francisco, to work on a decommissioning detail. And what do you think the first thing we did? Chip and scrape paint. We did it for a month, but at least we used pneumatic chippers. And then, of course, we didn't just paint the ship, we painted the entire ship. And then we had to cover the guns, cover the bridge. We looked like there was no tomorrow, but there were no watches. Oh, and I just mentioned watches. I'm going to digress. It was an interesting thing. When I was working on the bridges, writing the log, or as a helmsman, especially when I was writing a log, on the watch, we have watches, and they were basically, that meant you'd have a watch from 12 to 4 in the morning, the next one would be 4 to 8, 8 to 12, and to go on. And the worst ones, of course, was 12 to 4 in the morning and 4 to 8. You could never get over that. Your day was ruined when you lost those 4 hours. So the first time I had the 4 to 8 watch, one of the senior quartermasters said to me, he says, look, at 6:30 in the morning, you have to go to the captain's compartment. The captain had a compartment behind the bridge when the ship was in motion, and he always had to be up in case something went wrong. So they had to wake him up at 6 or 6:30. And so anyway, he said to me, what you do is you knock on the door until he knows you're knocking, and he tells. So as soon as you know he's awake, you tell him what the temperature is, what the barometer is. If there are clouds in the sky, tell him which clouds they are. And if there are any waves, tell them they're 5 feet, 6 feet, whatever. Don't worry, we can't figure it out either any better than you. So I did that. About that captain he was a real elitist. He was a ring knocker. If some of you don't know what a ring knocker is, that's a guy who went to Annapolis and they wear that ring. So anyway, he never paid much attention to me, and I didn't think he even knew me. One time when I was at the helm, he walked past me and he said, gentlemen, I want you to know we've got a gangster among us. Bugsy Siegel is steering the ship right now. Well, anyway, getting back, we got to the open shipyard. We had to chip paint. After about 2.5 months, they said, we built the Treasure Island, which was a big base in San Francisco at the time. We had to take a physical if you had any diseases or if you were sick. They wouldn't let you out of the Navy, so everybody crossed their fingers that they hoped they passed their physical. And knock on wood, I passed mine. They handed me that envelope that I was discharged, and that was it. And that was my Navy career.
Go ahead, go ahead, no, go ahead. Go ahead, put it right up to your mouth.
Yeah. Glen Waltrip's my name.
Right up to your mouth.
You have to put it real close to your mic.
Right up to your mouth.
We can't hear you unless you put it close to your mouth.
Right, no, right up to your mouth,
Okay.
right like this.
Hello. I just want to talk about my time I spent at
Unless it's close to your mouth.
Waynesville Airport. That's next to Fort Leonard Wood. I was up there, Fort Leonard. Fort Leonard Wood. And I thought I'd learn how to fly, and I thought I'd learn how to fly, so I was going, trying to going over to the airport, and the kind of planes we had was something like a Piper Cub. If you know what a Piper Cub is, there's a people in the front and this one guy sits in the back. A total of two people, and there's no steering wheel on it. There's just a stick, and so forth like that. But I liked the plane, and I got my license in that plane. Just about going back and forth. The only problem I had with that plane, that when I was landing it, I used to bounce it all the time. You have to kind of stall it out and let it go down by itself, and that didn't work for me. I didn't like that at all. And it's one of these ones that were, it wasn't tricycle gear at that time. It was just the two front ones, and the plane would be on an angle when you went to get into it. So, but it's a good plane, and it was a yellow one. What else can I tell you? A fine plane. Anyway, I got my license through that, and met a lot of nice people. There was Dave there, and Bill Knox. Dave was the owner. He had learned how to fly when he was 15 years old, and Bill Knox had learned how to fly when he was 14 years old. So these guys knew their business who were teaching me, so I got a kick out of that. And it was time to make some long-range flights, and we were going to go to Flippin, Arkansas. You ever been to Flippin, Arkansas? You have been? I'll be darned. First time I ever met anybody from Flippin, Arkansas. Anyhow, we flew down there, and I made a good landing. I was down there with Steve, the owner of the plane, and I made a real nice landing, and I was very proud of myself because I made a nice landing. And then I started to go out and fly back, and I started out going west, and then I turned and going up to Missouri to where we belong there, and out of Arkansas, where the Flippin was, we could get out of it. And I got out of the, I was running the plane completely. I was in the front seat, and the plane was in the back seat sleeping. And I got out to my altitude that I wanted, and everything was going very smooth, except all of a sudden the motor was making some sound, so I had to figure out what to do with this. And what I did, I very intelligently, I got Dave up, expert, who knew how to fly, and I thought we'd keep flying north to where the airport was, and looking for a place to land because something was wrong with the engine. And he took over the controls, and he turned the plane right back right away, and he was going down too, because we were on what they call a normal glide. And every time you fly in an airplane, you don't realize it, but there is a normal glide. They don't fall out of the air. They do not fall out of the air. They just go at a certain angle, and angles are all different for different planes. And anyway, we were going down there, and he saw this place to land, and he came to close by it, and he saw that it was on an angle, and we didn't want to land uphill. So what he did, he saw another place down there, and he made the turn there to go to the little place. And I guess he overran it or something, but because he started to turn the plane, he had to get back to it, and the plane was really falling at this time. It was really low, and we come past the wings, they turn in like this when they come down when you turn, they get about that high, you know, and you look under the wings, and I could see under there, I could see green. And not, never, the stuff you never see under the wings, you never see green. And finally got the plane straightened out. He was an expert pilot, and he told me to cover my face, you know. He didn't want the plane to flip over. You don't know what's going to happen. Or land in some farmer's field there. And we went down, and everything went very well. You know, he made a good landing, and we went to a stop. And everything was well, you know, and we got out of the plane. I was glad to get out. And there's a house there right close by. And we walked over to the house, and the person who was just in the new guy in the place, he was a farmer, and he was in the Air Force, and he had been flying, and he just, you know, wanted to know all of what happened to us, and we explained it to him and everything, and he was interested in it. He wanted to see the plane, you know. And we walked over and we saw it, looked at the plane. It looked good, you know, but something was wrong with the motor. That's the only thing that was wrong with the motor, and we tried to get it started, but we couldn't get the RPMs up. Otherwise, Dave was trying to start the motor. I was going to be left there, and I don't know how somebody would come down in the Ozarks to pick me up. But anyhow, we come back to the airport, and Dave and Dave and the farmer, they discussed things, and they just by themselves, and I wasn't part of it, but they decided to sell the airplane to the pilot. So that's what he wanted, and I guess Dave wanted that too. So everybody was happy, you know. And finally, the car showed up that was supposed to pick us up from down there, and we headed back, and we saw a sign that said, "Welcome to Missouri." Well, we thought we were in Missouri the whole time. Actually, we were still in Arkansas, and we drove back there, and well, that's the end of the story. That's about an airplane, but that is a thrilling experience for anybody. And people who they go in the trenches and all that, and that's all exciting. But so is flying an airplane. I like that. And I went there about 5 years later. I was at the University of Illinois, and my parents were down in Monette, Missouri. You know where Monette, Missouri is? Monette, Missouri. Yeah, they were retired down there. And so I was driving past that area. So I stopped in, you know. And it's about 5 years later after all this happened. And there was a grade school there, of all things. And a service station, a gas station was there. So I went up to the gas station man, and I said, "Did you know there was an airport here once?" He said, "Yeah." That's the end of that. That's the end of the story too. So thank you for listening.
Okay, I will try to make mine relatively short. So if you have any questions of any of us, you'll have a chance to ask. In 1956, I received a master's degree from the University of Michigan, an MBA, but the draft was still on. And my choices were the Army for 2 years or the Navy if I went to officers candidate school and passed for 3.5 years. I chose the Navy. I went to officers candidate school. I got my commission, and I was pre-designated as a supply officer because I had my MBA. And so my first stop was in Georgia, at Athens, Georgia, for the Navy Supply Corps School. And that was 6 months. That was great. After the rugged conditions of Newport with those white shacks, white board quarters. So 6 months at Athens, Georgia was very good. And then I was assigned a ship. And they said, what would you like? And I said, the biggest ship you can find to put me on. And that was an aircraft carrier. And at that time, the aircraft carriers they had were just single flight decks. And they were easing those out, but that's what I was assigned to. And then I joined my ship in Lisbon, Portugal. We were part of the Sixth Fleet. We put into our job was anti-submarine, not in, I don't want to say warfare. We never saw any war, but it was to track Russian submarines with a jet squadron and a helicopter squadron. So we traveled the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean. We were in Greece. We were in Gibraltar. We were all over. And then one day we were scheduled to get a break and go to the Caribbean, except some kind of flare-up occurred, and we had to continue to track Russian submarines. Anyway, finally they said, well, we're going to put your aircraft carrier, the USS Leyte, Leyte, which was named after the Battle of Leyte Gulf in the Pacific. It was considered the second major war of World War II. The Battle of Midway was considered the #1 Navy battle of World War II. The Leyte in the Philippines was considered the second most important battle. And what the Midway air battle didn't take care of, we took care of. I wasn't there, but that's what I read, and I'll stick with that. So finally, we went back to the U.S. and somehow I had a little leave, and I got my car, which was a 1954 Chevrolet, and I drove it to Norfolk because that's where the ship was going to come in to unload supplies and airplanes before we went back to where we were quartered in Quonset, Rhode Island. Now, what do you think happened? They put anybody who had a car could get it strapped to the flight deck. By the time we got to Quonset Point, Rhode Island, every car on that flight deck was pimpled with salt water. They moved the cars. I was ready for a new car anyway. Yes, the Navy wasn't going to pay for it. So that was that, and we put the carrier out of commission. And then I was assigned to, they said, where do you want to go next? I said, how about the Chicago area? They said, okay. And so I was assigned to the electronic supply office at Great Lakes. This is where the facility purchased all of the electronic parts for every Navy mechanism. And it was great duty. There were 15 of us officers who were the purchasing officers. That's a segment of supply. And 1,200 civilians. And we bought all the parts, and that was great. And Great Lakes with the electronic supply office was terrific. I joined Toastmasters. They had a contest. I came in second. That's okay. And finally, there was a party. A family in Winnetka hosted a party for young college girls who were home for the summer of 1958. I met my wife there, future wife, and we were married for 62 years until she passed away 3 years ago. It's a wonderful relationship. So I enjoyed my Navy experience. And it helped me, I would say this, if you have any grandchildren, if they're looking for a job in business, because when I got out of the Navy, with my background and my experience, the Navy was a big help, supply. And I got a good job in Chicago, stayed with it. And I'd recommend the Navy, not anything against the Navy, the Army, or the Air Force, but you always have a roof over your head. So it was a good experience and I liked it. So now, does anybody have any questions?
I'm done. This was absolutely excellent. I think we ought to give a big hand to all four of them. And thank them for their service. You know, we're at 11:30 and I have a question that might be good for all four of you. Okay? Rather than try to take in the short amount of time that we have, could each of you just tell us what life lessons you take away from your military service that have lasted your life? What have you learned that you say, well, you know, I learned that in my experience. Maybe start with you, Don, and then just go down and give the microphone to each of you.
Okay,
How do you feel about that?
well, if I understood the question, you learn to get along with men, because I was on a ship with only men. Today, there are women on ships, believe it or not, in the US Navy. But you learn to get along with people from all over the country, from all ranks, and it was fine. It was good. So to get along with everybody of all makes and shapes from all over the country. What?
Ditto.
I guess you also learn to be very short. And don't volunteer.
I'm going to use Bill Belichick's saying, do your job. And I'll add to it that you get further, no matter what it is, if you're working for somebody, do your job, don't complain, just do it.
I think one of the things that we learned was how to budget. As a corporal in 1958, a married corporal, pay was $201.44 a month. So we started as a couple to really learn how to deal with minimal funds at any particular time and do the best we could with it.
Thanks, Jack. Okay, I can't end here. As you can see from my shirt, I went on Honor Flight Chicago. If you've been in the service, and you don't have to have been in battle, but if you've been in the service and you served, you can go on this Honor Flight. How many in this room have been on Honor Flight Chicago? I see. Yeah, okay. It's great. Believe me, if you, it's so easy. You go to Flight Chicago, it prints out the statement, not the statement, the questionnaire. You fill it out, you mail it in, and maybe I had to wait 3 years before I could go. But it was worth waiting. It was a great day. The hardest thing you have to do is to be at Midway Airport at 4 a.m. That's the only thing. It's so wonderful. If you've been to Washington, D.C. before, with all this group and going through all the monuments, and especially the tomb monument with the different ceremonies, it's a treat. It's really good. So I recommend that you do it. You'll never regret it. And one of the great things about Honor Flight Chicago is the one that I like the monuments, I like the people, the color guards. But when you arrive at the destinations, Washington, D.C., and back home in Chicago, maybe on television, you saw people going down the aisles And I'm telling you, the families were, my daughters there, the bands were playing, bagpipes were playing, chills went up my spine. And so it's wonderful to get a hold of that questionnaire, Honor Flight Chicago. Do it before it's too late. You'll never regret it.